Shalom, this is Levi Shore. Welcome back to Sweet and Good Torah. All right, we have a very special episode of Sweet and Good Torah today. So I'm going to tell the story from Hollywood to the Holy Land, like how I became like an Orthodox religious Jewish person. You can use the terms like Shomer Shabbos, Shomer Kashrus, meaning like I observe Shabbos with all the malacha. I observe, the laws of keeping kosher. And I know, I've been thinking about doing this for years. I just never did it. I'm thinking it may be interesting if people want to, if people are on a religious journey of their own, maybe they have questions, or maybe they'll see some similarities with their own journey, or if just someone has the question, like, in this day and age, in this, modern secular world, why would someone even become religious? Why would they become more Torah observant? All right, so our story begins a long time ago, in a city not so far away, because I'm back in my hometown right now, and we'll talk about all that. But I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and I think it's interesting. I think when you, like, the whole idea of nostalgia, I think when you think back to your childhood, it seems like a very innocent, great time, because you're just doing, kid things. And so I look back at the 1970s, where I really grew up, and it was just such like a magical time to grow up. There was crazy stuff happening all around. I mean, I was 1 year old when there was the moon landing, and then there was the Vietnam War, and there was Watergate, and all these, all these things. I think like the year I was born was all the years of RFK was killed, and MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. So it was crazy times, but it all seemed like this amazing childhood in the 70s. So let me see. So my background is interesting. We belong to a modern Orthodox synagogue. So I did have some background at day school, and I'll talk about it soon. But I think my family really, we were more modern. There were some families that were more Orthodox, and they lived near the synagogue, and they kept kosher, and they kept Shabbos, so they would walk to shul. But we would drive to shul. I mean, we're basically like we would go, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I'm trying to think. I mean, besides my bar mitzvah, I'm not sure if we really went to synagogue besides Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We had seders. We had seders for Passover. We lit the menorah, the Hanukkah menorah. But so my background was, so I went to a modern Orthodox school in Baltimore. It's called Beth Tefillah, but I only went for, it was really strange. I only went for kindergarten, and I went through 3rd to 5th grade, and then all the rest of the time I was in public school. So I was always like, and you'll see later when I go to yeshiva, like I always felt like I was playing catch up when it came to like the Torah and learning. But I would think though, then after 5th grade, starting in public school in 6th grade, all the way through high school, then I think I really was, exposed to the basically secular American upbringing like everyone else. I mean, I love the Baltimore Colts. I love the the Baltimore Orioles. I was in the Kiss Army. I was a big fan of Kiss when I was a kid. I loved also the band The Who as I got older, and other rock bands. Let me see. So I don't know. I think it was pretty standard American, childhood. It was interesting that I used to live on a street called Streamwood, and I would ride my bike to the end of the street, and I would look across this very busy street, and there was this huge school there, and the school was called Talmudical Academy. So if you stick around and listen to the whole story, you're going to get the big surprise about TA, Talmudical Academy. But it was interesting because I remember even some of the kids at Beth Tefillah, they would talk about those really, really religious kids that went to Talmudical Academy. So even in the modern Orthodox day school, there was much more religious people out there. I think one of the things that really stuck with me back then. So when I came back to 3rd grade, I was in public school, 1st and 2nd grade. I had to play catch up in the Hebrew. I remember I had to go. I think it was like the 1st grade. I was learning the Aleph base with the 1st grade class. When I started 3rd grade, I think I did that for a couple of weeks to catch up, and then I was dumped. I remember learning Chumash. I think it was my friend's mom, so I think she took it a little easy on me. But yeah, I felt very behind. I don't know where everyone else was with their Hebrew and all that. So I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit, but basically, I mean, pretty standard childhood. I was very good at science, and so when I went to college, I mean, it's funny we call it college, but really it's really if it's 4 year school, it's really university. But I started at pre med. I started in the pre med program at Emory University, and I just make a little comment like it's interesting because I hear people complaining now. Why is there a lack of doctors? And it really makes me laugh because I was very motivated to go to medical school back then. I love science. And right when I got to Emory, they had like this weed out program, and I did very good in my courses for pre med, but a lot of the electives they just drove me crazy, and it was weird. Like some professors, would be extremely demanding, and some would be very easy in this in the one-on-one classes. And I don't know. I found out later there was a whole guide. People knew how to get around the system. I was kind of oblivious to it all. But anyway, so after my freshman year at Emory, oh, so my quick comment about the medical school. So yeah, I think the bachelor's degree, I became very disenchanted with academia. And I think people that are interested in learning medicine, instead of them wasting 4 years and all that money to just get this worthless bachelor's degree. I'm sorry, maybe you disagree, but I think it's worthless. I think it would be better to start people that are interested in becoming doctors right into a medical program. Just start them learning instead of wasting your 4 years. Start learning, and then you'll have more doctors. Besides the whole weed out idea. I mean, you should be looking for kind people. You don't want anyone that doesn't understand. But you also, I mean, it's not really looking for compassionate people. I just, that's my quick comment on the whole medical, industry or whatever you want to call it. It's an important profession. I mean, I still, and you'll see through the Torah, I'm still very interested in healing and how disease works, and it's interesting in the higher levels of Torah, and all levels of Torah in some sense, start talking about, the healing, and, hopefully I'll do some more sweet and good Torahs on some of that. Right, so then it was interesting. So my family, we actually moved from Baltimore to Florida in between my freshman year and sophomore year at Emory. So it was weird. I was exactly the same distance in Baltimore to go down to Atlanta that I was to go down to Atlanta, and then we moved to Boca Raton, Florida. And the plane flight was almost the exact same distance. It's very strange. So I started from the north, and then I'm coming now from the south. So it was it was a big shakeup. It was fun. It's really fun living in Florida. Florida's great. So I don't know. It was just very disorienting time, and I was having trouble sleeping a lot my sophomore year, and I was really starting to consider switching to a film program and transferring schools. So for whatever reason, I took a couple semesters of David Cook. He's tremendous film historian at Emory, and I really enjoyed it. That was some of my favorite classes there, and it's very interesting because when I finally got to film school, we actually used his textbook for film history, which was pretty amazing to get to learn from him. So I couldn't sleep much, and it was strange. And a friend gave me this Oxford English Bible. I think that's what it's called. And I just literally opened up at page 1 and just started reading it. And I never really read the Torah. I learned it in day school. I was familiar with a lot of Torah stories, but I never actually really read it from cover to cover. Excuse me. So it was very fascinating, and I had this huge reaction when I started reading it. I was really drawn to it, and I wasn't sleeping, so I just kept reading it night after night. And I don't know when exactly the observation came to me, and maybe it was a couple years later, but it's fascinating because I did have somewhat of a writing background. I took some creative writing classes when I was in Emory, and I took some screenwriting classes when I was I will get to it soon, when I went to film school. So I like to read a lot. I had a writing background somewhat, and I found it fascinating because a really top-notch literary genius, when they write a story, you may have, I don't know, you could have 3 or 4 characters, if even that much, and maybe their names really symbolic of that character. But generally, I don't think you find many books where, and I could be wrong, you could tell me if anyone's a literary major or whatever. But I don't think there's many books where every single character in the book is completely symbolic of who they are. Maybe the author tries this, but what I found fascinating as I started reading from Genesis is it seemed that every character, every person mentioned in the Torah, or even objects mentioned in the Torah, or a place or a city, and as soon as the years went by, it's like it became apparent to me that every single name is completely symbolic of its essence. And as the years went by, I started saying, well, like, who wrote this? I mean, like, what is going on here? This is beyond like normal writing genius. So when I got home that summer, I kept reading. I kept going forward, and then I think I substituted my Oxford English Bible for I think it's called like the Jewish Publication Society, and I think it was like the conservative movement, and they had a Tanakh. They had like a translation of the Tanakh, so I switched over to that. And I just kept reading. Story like I never really knew past coming out of Egypt. I knew I liked the movie Ten Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille, which we'll talk about soon, and later Prince of Egypt. That was when I was a little older, when I was already in Los Angeles. But these are amazing stories, and I was a huge fan of Steven Spielberg growing up, and I read an interview of him. I think it may have been in Rolling Stones. I forgot which magazine had it. And he mentioned that the essence of great movie making is storytelling. And really, a movie, in essence, is just like a film version of a story, of telling a story. And if you want to become a great filmmaker, become a great storyteller. Learn storytelling. And that idea really stuck with me. So I became really fascinated with like these stories I never heard. So like after we come out of Egypt, and then building the Mishkan and the tabernacle in the desert for 40 years. And then stories I really never was familiar with, like the story of Joshua and the conquest of the land of Israel against the 31 Canaanite kings. And then there was this period of judges, the Shoftim. And then some of those stories I'd heard. So the judges are like Shimshon or Samson, and there's Deborah. I'm trying to think of the English names. And then, the story, what else? Maybe Gideon. So some of these stories I think I'd heard over the years. But this whole period of judges. And then it really fascinated me when I got to the book of Kings. Because when I was younger, I loved like science fiction books and fantasy books. And it's interesting when I think about it, because I was really drawn, like some of my favorite stories were like The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. I really liked Dune. I really liked. I liked Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Just a lot of like science fiction, but Dune especially, and Lord of the Rings, and later like The Matrix when I saw them. And these stories really, they really resonated with me. And I think when I analyzed it later, it's really that in those stories. Also Bernard Malamud's The Natural. I loved baseball, and then the movie with Robert Redford. And I think it may have been Barry Levinson. I can't remember, but I really, in some ways, like the movie better, even though because they did the Hollywood ending and they changed it to a happy ending, and I really kind of like that better. But all these stories, in essence, and King Arthur, all the Arthur and myth, is that in some ways there's aspects of Mashiach in these stories. Like I really related, like I really like Paul Atreides and and Aragorn. Even though maybe I related more to the hobbits when I was a kid. I was really little. I was really short, really skinny. I was really little. Felt more like a hobbit. But there's something about like this aspect of Mashiach that's in those stories, which is really fascinating. So when I got to University of Miami, I played guitar a lot when I was young. So when I got to film school at University of Miami, you had to pick a second major. So at first, I was thinking music as my second major because they have a fantastic music program there. But what was interesting is at Emory, I had the privilege of being in this amazing jazz class, this fantastic jazz musician. He was so cool. It was just so much fun. I learned so much being in his class. but there really wasn't a jazz or rock or blues like option. It was really just kind of classical guitar, and I didn't really, I didn't really wasn't so into learning classical guitar at the time. So because I had such interest in keep reading the Tanakh, I switched my second major to religious studies, and that was pretty fascinating. So I got to keep learning Tanakh, and what I was going to get to is, like, even though I heard of King David and King Solomon, I was amazed that after the period of Judges, there was like these ancient kings of Israel, and it was so cool to me at the time. It was like a real life Lord of the Rings, and then hearing about the story of Mashiach, how it's like something just like in Aragorn. It's like this king that's kind of lost and not recognized, and then he comes in and he saves the world in this big like global struggle. And it was just really cool to hear that there was this ancient line of kings of Israel, and then there's going to be a return of the king. So it was really cool stuff. So as I was learning in University of Miami, it was interesting because I really I really learned about all the world religions. Like we went through the Christian Bible, went through the Eastern religions, so learning a lot about like Hinduism and Buddhism, and just the religious history of America, the religious history of the world, and it was pretty fascinating to me, and I was kind of really drawn to all that at the time. And I think one thing that was really interesting is we had a religious Jewish, I think he was a lawyer, and he was a religious Jewish person, I guess from like, I don't know exactly where he lived. Maybe he lived in like Miami Beach or North Miami Beach. But he taught us a class on the prophets, which I found fascinating. And what he did is he explained that like the Jewish people were in a covenant with God. We were in a covenant with Hashem. And that what the prophets would be saying is they would be saying, are you upholding like this covenant, or are you not, upholding this covenant? And I found that fascinating. Also, I think one thing that was interesting about the Eastern religions, I learned later, when I got to Yeshiva, that, right, the Jewish people we share a common root if you go back far enough, because Noah had 3 sons, so there was Shem, Japheth, and Ham. And the Jewish people and the Asian people, we are all from Shem, which means like the name. And so I think there is some like cultural similarities. Like there's a great value on learning and education. There's big value in family and respecting, like, your elders, respecting, your grandparents and great grandparents. I think unfortunately the way the world is, and maybe we're Bezrat Hashem right before the coming of Mashiach, I think it's all starting to break down. And if you see some of my other videos about Mashiach, you can hear more talk about that. But unfortunately, like, the whole family structure right now is kind of like break down. But I think these shared values are important. And I found it interesting. I heard in I never checked it out that much, but I heard in South Korea they kind of learn the Talmud, the Gemara, the Mishnah as I think more of like an intellectual exercise because it's a form of logic. But I found it interesting that they're actually learning Gemara there. So after graduating from Miami after 2 years, I wanted to move out to Los Angeles, and my goal was to move to Los Angeles, start working my way up, the ranks of the film industry, and hopefully one day start making like Torah movies, really like start telling these stories that people really haven't heard. People really haven't heard, and there's really, even though so many Jewish people, started the film industry, built a lot of the studios, and work in the film industry, it's kind of interesting that there's not so many films really about the Torah. And unfortunately, it's strange, but Hollywood, most of the films are really about assimilating and becoming like not so religious. Like the first synchronized sound film was I believe it was the Jazz Singer with Al Jolson, not the later remake with Neil Diamond, but it was the first time people saw synchronized sound in a movie. It was like they were doing Kol Nidre because his father was like the rabbi or the cantor or whatever it was. But the story is about him really like leaving the Torah and becoming a secular, singer. And there's a lot of Hollywood movies kind of like that. I mean, there is. We'll get to some of the, more based in the Torah. So then after I graduated, I moved out to Los Angeles, and it was a strange time. It was during the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, and there was it was kind of like a recession, and I went to I remember going to one studio. I think I went to MGM, which wasn't so big at the time, and I was coming with my resume. I was trying to find PA work, production assistant work, and there's this woman who's an executive there, and she sees my resume, and she's all stressed out, and she's like, I hope you're not here for a job because we're firing 35% of our staff. So I didn't want to lose a step. And I said, oh, it sounds like you're going to have a lot of room then to hire someone new. She laughed, but she said, no, unfortunately, we can't do that. So, right, so I got some PA work, and it was interesting, living in Los Angeles right off film school. But unfortunately, right, I wasn't, I was finding it harder to get work. So I moved back to Florida. And it was during that time, I was saying the Bush administration, it was the Persian Gulf War with Saddam Hussein when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And also it was weird because I didn't know if there was going to be a draft. So it was a strange time. And right, and I remember that strange speech by Bush. And I think he actually gave, I think it was 1990 or 1991. And it was actually on September 11th. And he gave that strange speech about 1,000 points of light and New World Order and all this stuff, and I was like, wow, sounds like there's more going on in this world than I understand. And right, so after a year, I ended up moving back to Florida, and then I just worked different. I worked in some restaurants. I worked at a TV station in Tampa for a year. That was interesting, and I tried to get this show going. It was called Cinema 101, where I was going to have different film students across the country send in their films, and I kind of do a Roger Ebert kind of Cisco Ebert, not criticizing them, but showcasing these student films. And I did a pilot, and the station manager where I work wasn't such a great person. I'm not going to go into all that, but it was interesting. And I met a friend there that we would have become friends also in Los Angeles, and he was real. He got me into he was talked all the time about all these conspiracy theories and all this stuff, the secret societies. I never really heard all this stuff before, so he was kind of an interesting person. And then I ended up, it was interesting. Then I ended up working at IBM for 3 years in Boca Raton. And it was kind of the beginning of, at the time, I think they called it multimedia. Now they may call it there was new media for a while. I don't know what they call it. But it was interesting because I got the job because I had the film school background. And it was neat. I started working with computer animation and doing graphics. And there's some really great graphic artists that work there. So I learned a lot about graphic design somewhat. Wish I learned more. I wish I was a little better at graphic design. And it was really interesting. It was really interesting working there. There's really nice people. It was a young group of us, and we were all friends. And it was a really fun time. But my heart was always on getting back to Los Angeles. So finally, IBM decided to move the whole plant to Austin, Texas, which I didn't really, have any desire to do. But I saw this as an opportunity to move to Los Angeles. So there's a joke at IBM. It's IBM stands for I've been moved, because unfortunately they like to move their people around. But another interesting thing about working there was it was actually the place where the PC computer was invented. It was where it was invented. There was a great guy I worked with there, and he was kind of this Radar O'Reilly type person, and he knew how to get everything. He could find anything. He knew how to work the whole corporate system. That was very interesting. And one thing he showed me, which was pretty interesting, is he showed me this room, and he's like, this is where they gave Bill Gates OS 1. And that's a weird story. That's an interesting, strange story of that whole thing. But anyway, so then, right, I moved back to Los Angeles, and I ended, after a year, I ended up in this very interesting building. It's called the Park Wellington. So if you're a big aficionado, I can't talk anymore. But if you know Los Angeles, you may know where it is. So it's in this area called West Hollywood, which was strange. I mean, there's big gay community there. So it's kind of in between two worlds. So honestly, my world was more going up to Sunset. We were right below Sunset Boulevard, and right across the street. So it was a nice condo building. It was very interesting. It was we had a nice swimming pool. There was a sauna. There was I think there was 2 hot tubs, tennis court. There was a really great gym. It was a really cool place to live. It was very interesting. So my world was kind of like that, and then across the street there was this hotel called the Sunset Marquis. It was very interesting at the time because in that hotel there was a recording studio in the basement. And then I'll mention his name. So Randy Gerber, who's married to Cindy Crawford, he owned a bar called the Whiskey Bar in there. Now there's another whiskey bar up on Sunset, the Whiskey A Go Go. So I'll talk about that briefly. But it was really fascinating because a lot of musicians would hang out there. They would stay in the hotel, like really famous musicians. And then because the musicians were there, then like the young Hollywood crowd, all the actors and actresses would come there. So it was interesting interacting with like all kinds of celebrities, and so it was a very interesting time. And then I'll never forget when it moved into the building. I'm coming up in the elevator, and then Angelina Jolie is coming down the elevator, and I think she was moving out that week. I think at the time she was married to the guy she was in Hackers with. I can't remember his name right now, but it was interesting. So I had a real Hollywood, like Los Angeles experience, and right, I was a real big fan of the Doors, like Jim Morrison and the Doors. So it was interesting because like their office was like right near where I lived, and right, I think they got their start, the Whiskey A Go Go, up on Sunset Boulevard, and then like Johnny Depp and I forgot if it was. I think River Phoenix died. I think they were partners. I forgot who the other partner was. There was the Viper Room, and then there was the Sky Bar, which was also, I think, partially owned by Randy Gerber, and then the House of Blues. So and then there's a country place. I remember there was like a country place that had like the electric, but there was all kinds of stuff on Sunset, and that was interesting. And then, right, I was kind of like working in the industry. One thing I did was at times I would kind of write summaries on screenplays for this producer, and it was actually pretty cool. I think I was like an unpaid intern, and this was actually right before I went to we'll get to that later, but I think he was the producer of The Godfather, but at the time I was just almost leaving Los Angeles, so I'd never really spent a lot of time in the office. I mean, I would have asked him a ton of questions about The Godfather, but it gave me the opportunity to just like read a lot of scripts, summarize the scripts. So that was a good experience. And then mainly what I did, because I had the background from IBM, I kind of got into the CGI, like the computer graphics, computer animation. So I started getting jobs like that, and that was really fun, really fascinating. But it was funny because like I always considered that my day job. Everyone's got a day job in Los Angeles, and what I was doing a lot of times is I would do a freelance job, or I'd be working, and then at night I would be writing screenplays. So I wrote I was big into comic books. I wrote a screenplay on Daredevil, and all kinds of stuff. I wrote a film noir. A lot of it was personal, some based on personal relationships and things that happened. So I wrote a science fiction martial arts thriller called The Occupation, which is interesting. And I don't know. I think it was Love on the Rocks was one. I don't know, all these screenplays, but right. So my goal initially was to work my way up the industry, and then start making Torah films, and maybe even go to Israel and film them in Israel, and maybe build up the film industry there. I didn't really know much about the Israeli film and television industry. They were much more it makes sense, but they're much bigger than I thought they were, but not really distributed like internationally so much, maybe until recently, like shows like Fada and all that stuff. So finally I got fed up, and one of my friends, I've been there like 9 years or whatever it was, so 10 years total in Los Angeles. And I asked him, I said, okay, I need to sell a screenplay. I need to sell a screenplay, I'll sell out, whatever, just tell me what to do. So he says, and he was working for one of the top talent agents in Los Angeles. I think it was something too, like I think the agent he was working for was at CAA maybe, and then transferred to William Morris. I don't know, it was this whole big thing. It was in like Variety magazine, all this stuff, but it was, he's working with the top guy. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes. So the advice he gave me is either write the greatest screenplay that ever existed or write a sequel to a famous movie. So, okay, I'll write a sequel. So what I did was, all of a sudden, it like reawakened my original intention of being there, and like the religious studies background. And what I decided to do is, I'm going to write a sequel to the movie The Ten Commandments, the famous like 19. I think it's. Let me see. I got it here. I think it's the 1956 Cecil B. DeMille movie, starring Charlton Heston. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write this. People don't really know the story past, like that movie. And then the Prince of, I think around that time also, it was like the Prince of Egypt was coming out from DreamWorks. So I said, I'm going to write a sequel to that movie, and I'm going to start it at the splitting of the Red Sea. That's how it's going to start. It's like, forget all the 10 plagues, like when you go back and do a prequel, but it's going to start at the splitting of the Red Sea. It's going to be this big opening scene where Moses is there and just the Red Sea splits. And then it's going to be the story that people didn't know. So I called it the Book of Numbers, because it was basically, the main point of the story was Yeshua's invasion of Israel, and the war against the 31 Canaanite kings. And I was going to tell what I thought was really a story that a lot of people hadn't learned or hadn't heard. At least the general American public. I mean, there's probably a lot of, there's obviously Orthodox Jews that are, very familiar with the Torah. There's a lot of like evangelical Christians. So there are people that are familiar with these stories, but from my perspective, growing up pretty typical secular American background, not a lot of people had heard these stories. So that started really leading me on an interesting journey. And I started like calling rabbis all around Los Angeles to see if I can get someone to help me, to give me kind of like that rabbinical perspective on the screenplay. I'm not going to go too much into like personal relationships, but there was like, I fell in love with this girl who wasn't Jewish. It was like the first time I fell in love. And there was two young women that I actually considered like marrying. And and what's interesting is they were both kind of like practicing Christians. And I was pretty serious. And, so the first one, like when we started talking about marriage, I don't know. A lot of also stuff started happening in the marriage, but it's interesting because like her mother gave me like Alan Dershkowitz's book, I think like The Vanishing Jew, which I don't think I ever read, and I found it odd. Like why are you giving me this? I'm thinking of marrying your daughter, and you're telling me it's the whole book. I think not to assimilate, not to marry like a non-Jewish person. So that it didn't work out, and then this other young woman also. So then with the next one, we started talking about, like, she's like, oh, would you ever want to get married? I think she brought it up one time we were at a party, and I started talking about it, and I said, okay, well, I know I'm not very religious right now, but I always had it in my head that when I get married, my wife will be Jewish, or at least be a convert, and we'll raise the children Jewish, and like I really want to celebrate, Shabbat and keep kosher, which is strange. And I think it all came from that little kernel from, the modern Orthodox day school. And when I was very young, we used to go to my grandparents for Shabbos dinner. I mean, also my grandfather, like he would go to shul, but he was modern Orthodox. And so they weren't very Orthodox, but they would have a Shabbos meal, and it was nice. And unfortunately, when my grandfather, my mom's father, when he passed away, when he was nifter, we sat down, like me, my parents, and my sister. We sat down at the table Friday night, and we were going to kind of do a Shabbos. And it was very strange because like we really didn't know what to do, and we didn't really keep Shabbos, and like I remember like my father asking, like, do we want to do this again? And it just felt like a normal dinner, and we were all kind of like, no. It's kind of a very sad moment, very sad American Jewish moment in some ways. But I don't know, it's a lot from my childhood really stuck with me. And also being a religious studies major, and just starting to write this screenplay. So somewhere along the line, I was like, I gotta marry a Jewish girl. I'm not really meeting any Jewish girls, like ironically, in the film industry. I don't know what part of the film industry I was in where I wasn't meeting Jewish people, but I was in that part. And I decided to join this conservative synagogue at some point in Westwood, Sinai Temple. And that's this whole strange stuff there, which I won't go into. But so when I started writing the screenplay, I started going like to the bookstore there. I remember going to the mitzvah store. I think at the time it was 613 and a half pico or something. But I started going to religious, like Judaic bookstore, like the Chabad store, I think it was on Fairfax. But started going around to Jewish bookstores. And I went to the University of Judaism, which is very interesting. It's a conservative place up on, I think it's Mulholland, very beautiful, like beautiful campus. So when I was in the Sinai Temple bookstore, I heard this word I never heard for the first time. And there was some older ladies that worked there. And I was buying books, and maybe we were talking a little bit. I was talking about like the screenplay and what I was doing. And they were like, "Oh, you're a Baal Teshuvah." And I was like, what's a Baal Teshuvah? I had never heard of that word before. She's like, "Oh, that's someone that becomes religious." I was like, "I'm just writing a screenplay here. What are you talking about?" So I don't know. So I was working on this like for a year or so. It was like three months or so. It's just in between three freelance jobs, and it was an amazing time because I was like, as I was writing it, I really pictured myself like in the desert with the Jewish people, coming out of Egypt, and with Joshua, with Yeshua invading the land. It was just in that war for Israel. It's very interesting, and I was just picturing it all in my head as I was writing. So some other interesting places while I was there that I started going into. So one place I went into was very unusual. It's called the Philosophical Research Society, and it was started by a man named Manly P. Hall in, I think, 1934. He was like a 33rd degree Freemason. So it was an interesting place. They had like all kinds of, honestly, besides all kinds of books on world religions, they had all kinds of occultic books, all kinds of books on magic. It was like a real life Hogwarts. And secret books like locked up in the back. So it was just an interesting place. And what was so strange about it is, at the time, it was just a lot of Jewish people. Like I think in its heyday was like the 20s or the 30s. And also another place I went, we'll talk about soon, it was the Kabbalah Center. That was very popular at the time. Madonna, was involved with the Kabbalah Center. So I remember, and I think I go there a lot on Shabbos, and just a bunch of Jews sitting around this like occultic based midrash. And I was getting a lot of the R.A. Kaplan books. So some of the books that really stuck with me and really, I think, propelled me on this journey was R.A. Kaplan's Sefer Yetzirah. And I just started reading it, and I was like, wow, what is this, like, wisdom, or this, what is this? It's so beyond anything. It's all mysterious, and it's riddles, and it supposedly does magical things, and, like, it's just beyond anything I've ever heard before. And I remember I got his, I think his book on Kabbalah and meditation, and I remember one of the guys there, he asked me, he's like, do you understand what the Shekhinah is? And I was like, I've seen it in all these books. I don't really know. I don't really know. And I'm going to tell you honestly, even today, 20 years of learning in yeshiva and just on my own, the Shekhinah, it's such a mystical concept. It's a mystical concept of this infinite being, but he manifests himself, he manifests something, that's some essence of himself, and that's what was in like the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, and the Shekhinah is what sits upon the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark of the Covenant. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but that really stuck with me from Beth Tefillah, like learning about the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark of the Covenant. And when the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, first thing, it's Spielberg and George Lucas. Oh, and I forgot to mention that too. Star Wars had a big effect on me. Like Luke Skywalker and Anakin, and like the aspects of Mashiach of like Luke Skywalker. And then it's strange because in some ways Anakin is like redeemed like Mashiach. And yeah, so those movies had a huge impact. And I just remember being blown away going to see the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember one time it was like I had nothing to do, and my parents were like, "You want to go to movie night?" I was like, "Sure." And it was some long title. It was like, Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I had no idea what it was. So it just sounded like I knew just like any film title that's really long. It's not like Jaws. It's not like Star Wars. It's not something exciting. It's like going to be like one of those boring movies, like Children of the Lesser God. Anything that has, or anything ordinary people. I don't know, anything that has a lot of words in it, in the title, it's going to be one of those boring movies. And I just blown away, like the first action scene and the boulder and the plane and the snakes and like the whole thing. And one thing I can say about it is, it's so strange like seeing a movie about the Ark and the Covenant. But the people who created it, like Bezalel, like actually created the Ark of the Covenant, and Moses, I think, built another one. That there's no Jewish people in the movie. It's like you have your Protestant, archaeologist, Professor Jones, and you have the Arab guy, John Rice Davies. I think he played his Arab friend from Egypt, and you have the Nazis, and everyone's fighting over the Ark of the Covenant except us. It's such a weird movie when I think about it sometimes. I really find that comment funny on Big Bang Theory, where they say, I think it was Mayim Bialik's character, when they made all the girlfriends watch it, and she said, "Oh, so if they didn't do anything, the results would have been the same." That's really funny insight in the movie. But right, so I think that had a big effect on me. Then I went to the Kabbalah Center because I was getting into Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan and the Zohar, and I met a religious person that lived behind the Kabbalah Center because I was looking for I was going through Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's book. I think it was Kabbalah Meditation. I was writing down all these books that he was talking about, and I wanted to start buying some of these Sfarim, some of these Kabbalah books. And there was a religious Jewish person that lived behind there, and so I bought some of the books from him that I was looking for. And then just sometimes going into Chabad on Fairfax or Malibu, and sometimes I remember one time going in to Chabad in Malibu, and they gave me this really interesting printout of different things, different concepts and Torah concepts. So as I was finishing up, so then it was a really strange series of events. Like everything was like, I said, like I had a friend working for the top talent agent, and I started calling in all my favors, like all my friends. I was like, I want to get the screenplay sold. I'm going to call in all my favors. I'm going to ask everybody for a favor. I never really asked anyone for anything. And I'm going to just, everyone I know, every contact I have, I'm just going to ask everybody, I'm going to try to get the screenplay sold. And everything just backfired or wouldn't work. It was just a series of unfortunate events, as they say. And I didn't really understand the hashgacha pratis of it at the time. But I met, one of the places I journeyed into was Aish HaTorah. And I met this young rabbi from Aish HaTorah, and he gave me like the golden ticket. And it's really interesting because like when I finished the screenplay, I remember this. I sat down on my couch and I prayed to Hashem and I said, God, I really want to like keep learning Torah in Jerusalem. I don't want the daily pressure of having to constantly find work in Los Angeles. Please send me to Jerusalem and let me learn Torah. I want to continue this. Like I enjoyed working on the screenplay. I want to make these movies somehow, and it was interesting. And then I got the opportunity, and I just remember that first night, just flying into Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv and coming to Jerusalem, and just walking into the old city of Jerusalem, just through these old stone walls, walking through the courtyard and. One of the students, his name is Baruch, like he met me, and it's just walking into the yeshiva and the base midrash, and it was just like overwhelming. And I just remember that first night I was sleeping on a bunk bed in my dorm room, and I look out the window, and there is the Har HaBayis. There's the Temple Mount. You see the Dome of the Rock, you see the Al Askemas. But just like, how did I get here? This is crazy. Like I'm in Jerusalem, and I'm looking at the holiest place in the world. I'm looking in the Temple Mount. So then I got there and I'm working. My idea is I'm doing research for my screenplay. I didn't know about this whole Kiru thing, Baal Teshuva, any of that. So I'm just there. I start taking the classes. There's going to be so many rebbeim, so many rabbis that had such a great impact while I was there for 6 years. But I'm not going to be able to mention them all. But I'll mention a couple. One family is very special, is like Rabbi Schwartz and Rebbetzin Schwartz. And it was interesting because Rebbetzin Schwartz, Rebbetzin Schwartz, I think it was her grandmother and my grandmother were friends. So it was nice to have like, someone, who knew, some of your family in Baltimore. And I remember, and Rabbi Schwartz was in charge of like, it's called the Essentials program. So it's the like introductory basic program. And I remember going to their house for that first Shabbos, and it was just so special. This nice house in the old city. And I just saw like them blessing their kids, and just all these delicious, like all these dips with the challah, and just this delicious meal. And and they're doing it on purpose because it's like, this is beautiful. And I was like, this is what I want. I want to get married, and I want to have, I want my kids. I want to bless my kids on Shabbos, and I want to, I want this. This is like very interesting. Now, it wasn't going to become religious overnight, because I really didn't know why I was there. I was just writing my screenplay, and I was going to go back to Los Angeles and sell my screenplay, and that was going to be that. And I think I started writing the sequel, like to that one. So when I was there, I kept reading books in the Beis Midrash. So some of the original rabbis that had a big effect in the essential part. So there's Rabbi Horowitz, who was great, and he was I think he had learned in Baltimore, or no, he was from Baltimore, and I think he learned in Telz. There's Rabbi Gogek, who was amazing. He was this amazing, he taught us Hebrew, which was very cool. Ulpan. As Rabbi Ellison had a big effect on me back then. The famous Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer taught us interesting things about Hasidus and Kabbalah, and Gerald Schroeder was interesting because it was like physics, or he was MIT. He wrote all his books about science and God, all kinds of interesting books, like comparing science to Torah. And then the incredible Rabbi Mati Berger. So it was also cool with him because he had started out, I think, at Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. And and I just, all of a sudden, as I'm there, first I did a month of essentials, and then I go to intermediate one. But it was strange at some point because, the guys in the dorm, I remember I was I had pipes and cigars, from Los Angeles, and I think I was smoking a pipe on Shabbos, and one of the guys in the dorm was like, "What are you doing? It's Shabbos." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm not religious, man." So it was weird. And then all of a sudden this idea started creeping in on me that they're trying to make us religious. So I was like, "Oh, wait a second. What have I got myself into?" So in total, I was there about 6 years. And I think what happened is initially I was there about 5.5 months. I had some really good friends I made, people from all over the country, which is interesting. And then my goal was, I don't know. Then I don't know. I don't know what my initial goal was. If it was to go back to Los Angeles, or I think it was to come back. But I went back, and at first I was with my parents a little bit in Florida, and then I went to Los Angeles to pack up all my stuff, and move it all back to Florida. But it was interesting because when I came back, I used to play guitar and sing with everyone in the Rova and in the square in the old city, and the Shabbos meals, and there was just so much singing, people singing, and I miss being in the class and learning the Torah, and I miss just hearing people sing. It's just interesting. People listen to a lot of music in America. There's a lot of famous pop stars, and can listen to all kinds of things now, right? You got iTunes, Spotify, I don't know, all these, whatever they all are, right? You can listen to music all over the place. People are always listening to radio, satellite. But I don't know so much in America where people just sit out a public square and they're just singing. It's there's street performers in Los Angeles, but people, and what was so weird about it was, even in Los Angeles, I knew people that were professional, some of these people I talked to, they were rock stars. And I think we had some famous musicians, and we definitely had some famous actors and actresses in the building I lived. But people just didn't sing. I don't remember going to parties and people would just break out a guitar and sing. And I missed it. So then I made it that I was going to go back, and then I was planning I was going to go I was going to become a rabbi. I was going to finish all the screenplays, the whole deal. So I ended up being there about 6 years, and then some of the rabbis that had a big effect on me, when I was learning Gemara. So one man was Rabbi Daniel Wilner from England, and it was interesting. I was in his Gemara shiur for I think about 3 years, and he had this thick. I forgot where he's from exactly. He may have been from Manchester or Liverpool. I can't remember. But a lot of the guys I was in yeshiva with were from London. And it was funny because I was in his shiur, I was in his class for so long that I understood his accent perfectly. And even though they were from London, they couldn't understand what he's saying. And I was here's the American guy, and I'm translating because I learned from him for so long. I knew exactly what he was saying. So I thought that was interesting. And then Rav Gil, the Mashgiach, and then, the great Rosh Yeshiva, Noach Weinberg, just who started it all. And Rabbi Eitan Feiner had a huge effect on me. And one thing that's interesting about Rabbi Feiner is that he had learned it in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. So it's interesting that a couple of the rabbis there, they had this background in Baltimore. And Rav Noach Weinberg himself, his brother was Rav Yaakov Weinberg, who was actually the Rosh Yeshiva at Ner Yisrael. And really the whole idea, the whole genesis, if you want to say, of Aish HaTorah itself, was in Baltimore, was in Ner Israel. So I don't know. So it was strange. A lot happened. I'm not going to go into all of it, but one thing that's happening is Rav Noach. He was very sick. I mean, I think he had, I think he may have had a tumor, I think a brain tumor, very bad stuff. And I remember davening for him. And I had another friend, unfortunately, who's nifter now, that we were davening for him. He had Hodgkin's. He's a very close friend of mine. And then I won't go into everything, but yeah, it was an intense time. But somewhere after 6 years, and I got married. I met my wife in Israel. She was learning at one of the seminaries in Har Nof, and it was interesting. And then we had our daughter on Xmas night. We had our little holy daughter. It was interesting. It was born in Jerusalem, our only Yerushalmi. And she was originally from Philadelphia, so we went back to get married because we thought it would have been too hard for our families to come to Israel. So we were looking around like Philadelphia, and it was interesting. There wasn't a lot of kosher food places, and to take a hotel, regular, hotel there and kashrut it and bring in the kosher caterer, it was so expensive. We found this amazing place in Lakewood called Base Vega. And they make it like really affordable, but they give you this like this amazing banquet. And some of my friends came in from Israel, and their families experienced this crazy Orthodox religious wedding that they weren't used to. So that was very interesting. And then I don't know. And then it was strange because then there was like this CEO of Aish HaTorah. So after 6 years, he told me like I wasn't Aish material. They weren't going to give me smicha. And it's kind of like it was a huge shock to my system. I mean, Hashem always has other plans. So, in retrospect, I think I would have tried to go to Rabbi Berkowitz's, his kollel. He had been like a big teacher at Aish. Now he's actually the Rosh Yeshiva now. And I don't know what held me back. I mean, I think my confidence was really shaken. And I wasn't sure if any other yeshiva was actually going to take me. It was kind of a devastating thing. After being there 6 years, I just thought I would get smicha from there. It was just a weird situation, and so we ended up going to making plans to go to Ner Israel in Baltimore. And my initial plan was to be there for 3 years, and then we would move down to South Florida. We'd do Kiruv down there, and guess what? Still in Baltimore. Hashem always has a fastball. You're gonna see it gets interesting. So I started buying Sfarim, Torah books for each one of the rabbis that really had a huge effect on me while I was there for the 6 years. And it was nice. And some of the rabbis I hadn't been in their class in years, but it was nice to be able to write like a nice thank you, a nice karsatov, to thank them for all the Torah they taught me and what a huge impact they had on my life. And then it was kind of sad. Like, we were friends. I had a lot of friends there. Now we were all kind of young couples, we're married, having kids. And we moved back to Baltimore. And before we left, one of the last places we visited was the hospital where Rav Noach was. And I got him a very special sefer. I got him Pardes Rimonim by the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. He may have had it already. And I wrote a really long thank you. And it seemed at the time that he was getting better. And I will honestly say, I mean, he was nifter 3 months later, I believe, after we left. And it was a shock to me because I don't know how many people I've ever met that wanted to see the Geula or did more to try to bring the Jewish people back. I mean, there's a lot of people doing great things, but he did a lot. And at least for me, like giving me a place, giving me a shiva to go to be able to learn Torah. It was a great opportunity. I was really appreciative. And I told him I was going to Ner Yisrael, where his brother had been Rosh Yeshiva, where he had been a student himself. And he got this twinkle in his eye, like he used to do. And he gave me a bracha. He said, he says, maybe you can makarv them And I had no idea what he was talking about at the time. But anyway, so I went to Ner Yisrael. We moved to Baltimore. And then when we got there, it was very interesting. When we got there, we found out that my wife was pregnant with our first son. And it was great. The first year was very interesting being in Rabbi Fran Shear. I don't know if you ever familiar with Rabbi Fran. He's just a tremendous storyteller. He's written a lot of books. He records a lot of his shirim. And it's very interesting being in his shir at Ner Yisrael. And I had some great chavrusas while I was there. And what he did is he would take his great ability of storytelling, and as we were going through the Gemara, he would kind of make, like, getting to the halacha, it would be a story of traveling through, like, all, the Rashi, the Tosafos, the Rishonim, the Acharonim, the modern poskim, and there would be kind of like a theme to each class, and it was like it was a story of the halacha. It was really incredible, and I think that was an incredible thing to learn from him, and it's very practical. Unfortunately, as you're going to soon see, after a year. So one thing was incredible, I'll tell you first. One thing that was incredible is that during his class, we were learning Masechta Shabbos. We were learning all the halakha of Shabbos, and one of the chapters, one of the parak is on bris milah, on circumcision, and it was incredible because we learned it, and then the moil came in and he gave us a class one day, explaining like the practical halakha of it all, and then very soon after, my son was born. And he had his bris right in the base midrash of Ner Yisrael with Rosh Yeshiva Feldman. It was the Sandak, and it was great because then the same moil that was lecturing in our class, he was there actually a moil that gave the bris milah to my son, and it was really exciting because I actually got to he set it up so he can do the cut, and I got to do the cut and the bracha, so it was pretty fascinating, and that was great. Unfortunately, right, once again, Hashem has other plans. And after a year or so in the shir, and it started a little bit. This whole thing is very mysterious. It started a little bit right before the final curtain, Aish HaTorah. I started just feeling very drained. Like I didn't know what was happening. My body started feeling very weak. So a couple of times, and then this may have led to I don't know. I mean, Hashem was orchestrating the whole thing, but then we moved back to Baltimore, and I felt perfectly healthy. But then I started feeling incredibly drained, and I would sleep a normal 8 hours, and I would get up the next day, and I could barely get out of bed, and I had no idea what was going on. And I went to my doctor, and then I went to a rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist said, "Oh, I really hope you don't have this, but there's this crazy disease called chronic fatigue syndrome." I always forget that there's another. It's myalgic encephalitis. I forget it. I don't even really care what it's called, but right. And I was just so drained. And then for my next 6 years at Ner Yisrael, it was just this crazy time. I mean, I went to every kind of doctor there was. I went to one Jewish, religious woman, and there's some weird energy thing. I don't know. I was interested in it. Every kind of supplement. I tried Chinese, everything, just acupuncture, all kind, endocrinologists, different rheumatologists, literally every kind of doctor. I went to cardiology, every kind of branch of medicine, basically, neurologists, everything, just checking out any kind of test, and no one could tell me how to get rid of it. We went to try to Makubal in New York. I mean, I think unfortunately, if we were in Eretz Yisrael, I think we would have been able to find a real solid Makubal that maybe would have told me how to get rid of. I mean, we talked to Rosh Yeshiva Feldman. I mean, I think we went to Philadelphia. We talked to Rosh Yeshiva. I don't know, I'm blanking right now. Kamenetsky. And just couldn't get rid of it. So it was 6 years of I fell out of Rabbi Franch here, and then I tried to join this other Chabura, and I couldn't keep that Chabrusa because I just couldn't consistently come. And then at some point I was feeling a little better, and I came back, and there was another Rabbi Horowitz that had a Chabura. It was good Smicha, Halakha, Chabura, and I had good Chabrusa, but it was strange. During that year, I had kidney stones twice. Not pleasant. And that kind of just really took all the wind out of my sails, all the fatigue. And I mean, I applied to disability. We couldn't get disability. And it was just tricky. So one great thing that happened is I made a kesher with this huge hidden tzaddik. I was going to give his name, Blind Heart, but his name's Rabbi David Meister. And he started learning with me when I was in the kollel. I just went to the back room in the kollel, and he sat right in front of me. So that was great because he learned with me Sifsei Chaim, and then he set up with me to teach other people. So I got to do a little kiru type work, and that was great. So unfortunately, then somewhere along the line, I think around 2010, my wife had she in Jerusalem, she had started a catering company called Sweet and Good Torah. She reversed, like on Rosh Hashanah we say have a good and sweet new year, and she kind of reversed it and did Sweet and Good Catering. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Maybe if you're doing the Gashmias, maybe I'll do the Ruchnias, and I'll do Sweet and Good Torah. So in 2010 or so, I started on her catering website. I started doing the first written Sweet and Good Torahs, and then here it is, the monumental, successful, Sweet and Good Torah on YouTube and Facebook, Twitter. I think we're on TikTok now, and Instagram, just Rumble, all over the place, right? But I don't know. We'll see. So unfortunately, right, I think being sick, and then it's just, I don't know, it's a lot. We Baruch Hashem, we had three boys, so we had 4 children in total. And I don't know, I don't know exactly what it was, but I know, like, my wife, her father passed away, and that was like fatal unfortunately for our marriage. Just all the sickness, the illness. Like I had no, like, I went from my goal of being like a kiruv rabbi, just like someone who was like never got smicha, even though I went through all the information, just not feeling well, just constantly battling this chronic illness. So never actually took the smicha test, even though I learned all the sugyas. And unfortunately, like in the last, and I still kind of in shock from it, but in the last, I don't know what it is, like 2-3 years, it may have been 3 years ago I think we were all together for Rosh Hashanah, and she moved out before Yom Kippur, and we were separated, then we got divorced, and so I think Baruch Hashem, I think that we're doing, we get along, we're not fighting, we're co-parenting, and just right, not where I expected to be in my life, but I believe like Hashem has a plan, whatever it's going to be, and I really believe we're really close to all going back to Eretz Yisrael at some point. But so for the last 3 years, as that whole process was happening, even though I felt incredibly sick and just really some of the worst of the chronic fatigue, then it was interesting when the process started, when we really started getting separated. Like Hashem kind of lifted it from me, and I felt healthy again. And I started teaching. I got an opportunity to teach physics at one yeshiva, and then I met another rabbi. I did this teacher training program, and he gave me the opportunity to teach. That year, the first year was English at this other yeshiva, and then after that, it's been last 2 years have been physics and environmental science. And it's interesting working with the Bakrim and teaching and trying to work as much Torah into the science, kind of a blending of Torah and science, Torah and physics, and then Torah and just learning about the world, the environment, just the earth, the animals, all that. So it's been interesting. I don't know. So that's been my journey up till now, if anyone's still around. And I don't know. I'll be interested if anyone else is on their journey, or just any questions about what it's like to become religious. Anything Shomer Shabbos, keeping kosher, anything. Just please let me know. And I believe it's going to be great things ahead, even though it seems like a strange time personally. It's interesting. So my ex-wife now, she mentioned after the horrible massacre on Shabbos of Simchas Torah in Israel, she actually mentioned it. Said, "Would you consider moving back?" And I was like, "Absolutely." So maybe there'll be a part 2. B'ezrat Hashem, at some point, Sweet and Good Torah will move back to Israel. Maybe B'ezrat Hashem, Mashiach will come, and all the Jewish people will move back to Israel. All right. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, please like, share, and subscribe, as they say. And hope to see you back again soon on Sweet and Good Torah.